ግንባር አዝሪ ከመይ ከም ዘሎ ህዝብና ሃየና ዓለም ንገሪ ዑፈይ ብረሪ ብረሪ ዓኩሉ ግንባር አዝሪ ከመይ ከም ዘሎ ህዝብና ሃየና ዓለም ንገሪ كمي كم زلو زلزي هاينا عالم نقري
Good morning. I'm Raleigh Flynn. I'm the president of the Foreign Policy Research Institute. I'd like to welcome you all this morning to our discussion, which is going to be an update on the Ethiopian Tigre crisis. As many of you know, this is not only a military conflict, but it's becoming a humanitarian crisis that affects not only Ethiopia and Tigray, but the larger region. So this morning, moderating our discussion will be Ambassador Charles Ray, who is formerly served as the U.S. Ambassador to the Kingdom of Cambodia and the Republic of Zimbabwe, and who is also the chair of FPRI's Africa program and an FPRI trustee. We'll also be taking questions from you. So as the program goes on, and we encourage you to put them in when you think of them, into the Q&A box, not the chat. We'll also be showing some maps of the region in our chat. We'll have links to maps during the program. We'll also be making a recording of this, a video, so it will be available afterwards, usually within 24 hours, often sooner, on FPRI's YouTube channel. I'd also like to, of course, as always, say thank you to our members and our sponsors. And to those of you who are not yet members or sponsors, we encourage you to do so. We always like to say this program is free to the public, but it's not free to us. So we encourage you to contribute. We have a wonderful panel this morning that includes former U.S. ambassadors to Ethiopia and the region who spent significant time on the ground. So we'll have firsthand knowledge to tap in discussing this region. Without further ado, let me turn it over to Ambassador Ray.
Thank you, President Flynn, and welcome to all of you. As you probably know, if you follow the news, the situation in Ethiopia in the Tigre region has really not gotten any better since our last event in November, and we've pulled together a distinguished panel of people who probably collectively know more about Ethiopia than any other group of people in the world who will talk to us today about it. I'd like to welcome Ambassador Vicky Huddleston, Aurelia Brazil, and David Shin. You've seen their bios on the announcement, but I'll let them basically introduce themselves briefly, starting with Ambassador Huddleston. Then at the end of their introductory remarks, I have one or two questions to basically get the ball rolling, and then we will turn it over to the audience for your questions to our distinguished panel. So to the panel, if you would please, a brief introduction of yourself and a few brief remarks on the current situation in Ethiopia with the Tigray region. Starting with you, Ambassador Huddleston.
Thank you very much, Charles. And what a pleasure to be here with all of you and with this large group, this large audience, and with my colleagues who were ambassadors to Ethiopia. I actually was just a chargé to Ethiopia. And one of the things I remember most as chargé, and this was in 2006, I asked Prime Minister Meles why this Constitution of 1994 built this system of ethnic federalism, which as far as I know, certainly doesn't exist anyplace else in Africa. We have federated states, but not an ethnic federalism. And he said to me, we couldn't do anything else. He meant that because there were many, well, not many, there were a few prominent ethnic groups who had fought the communist Derg and had essentially won that conflict and taken power. But the unsaid, I think, part of this is that the Tigrayans, who were essential to the victory, wanted to preserve their identity and, in a way, their autonomy. And doing so may have been the great mistake for Ethiopia, because this ethnic differences, which have been exacerbated by ethnic federalism, has now led to this tragic war in Tigre. And it seems to me all the more tragic because the Ethiopians, the Tigrayans in particular, who were the basis of the power of the EPRDF, always saw Tigre, going back to Tigre, as their safe haven. They also saw Article 39 of the Ethiopian Constitution of 1994, which they created, that allowed for peaceful secession as kind of their way out of Ethiopia should things turn against them. And the irony is that although they created this secession, they created the ethnic federalism, they created a safe haven in Tigray, it was not a way out for them. In fact, it turned into this tragic war that looks like, in many cases, ethnic cleansing, the massacre at St. Mary of Zion, the looting of artifacts, and there are many in the churches around Tigray, and the presence of Eritrea, the traditional enemy, as well as militias from Amhara, from the Amhara region. But what is as least as concerning as this tragic war in Tigray is that underlying this tragic war in that region is the possibility of similar wars throughout Ethiopia. The Oromos, many of their leaders continue to press for independence. Somalia has region, the Ogaden, has always considered the possibility of autonomy or independence. So today, in my opinion, and I'm looking very much forward to hearing from Ree and David, I think Ethiopia faces an existential crisis. And if it does not have a national dialogue with its various ethnicities and with civil society, we could, in the long run, see the breakup of the Ethiopia as a country. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Brazil.
Thank you, Ambassador Ray and Chargé Vicky Huddleston and Ambassador Shin. Delighted to be here with you both on this panel. I think Vicky covered some of the history, so I'll just pick up on her point about the need for a national dialogue, which I think is indeed necessary, but perhaps a comprehensive peace plan is needed as well to address some of these issues. There are rumors that are hard to substantiate in terms of the plans that Eritrean President Isaias and Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy might have in terms of federation for a larger regional approach. And these kinds of this kind of information is bouncing around in terms of the bringing the Eritrean military forces in Ethiopia under the Ethiopian military, talking about opening federation talks for a regional approach to the Horn of Africa that apparently Isaias has had in his mind for quite a while. There are, I think, more thought in the Tigrian refugee community, overseas community, as well as people still in Ethiopia about independence for Tigre, because they don't see a way forward toward a national dialogue. So it's very difficult, I think, to substantiate some of these rumors and even perhaps intentional misinformation. It's hard to know against what is happening in the broader country of Ethiopia. I think it is an existential threat, but Ethiopia has evolved itself over history into its own independent country. So I'm not exactly sure that Ethiopia would be breaking up. It's a matter of a different kind of dialogue. But I'll stop there. I was in Ethiopia when they had the 2005 election. And at that point, there was a large risk of different groups breaking off from the national government, which I think internally in Ethiopia, as well as in the collective donor community of countries that support Ethiopia, we were able to prevent, but we did encourage continued dialogue, and I don't see that happening today at all. And I would add Benishangul Gumuz area to the need for discussion, as well as Afar and Amhara itself. I'll stop there.
Ambassador Shin, you're on mute.
Thank you, Ambassador Ray, and it's nice to be with Ambassadors Huddleston and Brazil, although I know them as Vicky and Ray, so I'll use the formality for the moment. My involvement with Ethiopia dates back quite a long time. I actually was the assistant desk officer for Ethiopia in 1969, which probably is before many of our participants were even born. But have been engaged off and on with Ethiopia ever since, including as ambassador from 1996 to 99, and then academically over the last 21 years, including writing an encyclopedia, sort of an encyclopedia of Ethiopian affairs. I want to pick up for a moment on a couple of the items that Ambassador Huddleston raised, sort of historically, and just drill down a little bit further, because I think it really does add to an understanding of the current situation, which is what I am assuming all of the questions will be about. And that is the whole issue of ethnic federalism created a situation beginning in 1991, when ethnic federalism was effectively conceived after the overthrow of the previous government, whereby one ethnic group in particular, the Tigrayan group, which is about 6% of the country, and the area that we're going to be talking about primarily today, was led by an organization called the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, the TPLF. And that, because that was the group that was largely responsible for overthrowing the previous dictatorial regime, it was the one that had most of the power in the new government beginning in 1991. The problem with that is that from 1991 until about 2 years ago, when the Abiy Ahmed government came into power, it was a government that had considerable power in the country of Ethiopia. This power came to be resented over time by other ethnic groups and other organizations in the country, to the point that when a new regime came into power a couple of years ago, the TPLF started pulling back to Tigre region, I mean, literally moving back. Its leaders were being removed from power in Ethiopia, many of them. I think they kind of saw the handwriting on the wall that their role was going to be greatly diminished, so they had better make the best of it in Tigre. And they probably made some mistakes at this point, as did others in the country. Elections were scheduled last year for all of the country, parliamentary elections. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, they were canceled in Ethiopia, but Tigre went ahead with them, and they actually held successful elections, which the TPLF won overwhelmingly. Presumably, the election was relatively free and fair. This started a whole chain of events that has put us in the situation that we are in today, culminating on November 3 of last year with an attack by the Tigrayan Defense Forces against the Northern Command, the central government Northern Command in Mekelle, the capital of Tigray region, that has led to the current conflict or war. Now, unfortunately, what has happened is that there have been enormous abuses since then in Tigray, which has further alienated the Tigrayan people from the rest of the country. And you have the situation that Ambassador Huddleston alluded to of a possible breakup of the country should Tigray decide to go that direction. You could, in fact, have a balkanization of Ethiopia if Tigrayans tried to break away, and there is increasing effort by some of them to do just that. I'm not suggesting it will come to that, but that is a possibility. So that's where we are today. I'll stop there and look forward to all of your questions.
Thank you very much, all three of you. That gives us a lot of food for thought. Before we turn it over to the audience for their questions, I was going to ask about the possibility of this Tigray-Ethiopia conflict spreading to the broader region, but the mention of the possibility of Ethiopia breaking up brings up another very important question, and that is with the AU headquarters being in Addis, should Ethiopia break apart, what impact will that have on the AU and its ability to do its job for the rest of the continent? Whoever would like to take a stab at that, please. How about you, Ambassador Shin? You have sort of a long-standing experience.
Well, I'm not predicting there will be the breakup of Ethiopia. It's just a possibility and one that is worrisome. But accepting the premise of your question that should that happen, what will happen to the AU? It obviously will pose difficulties for the AU. It will not make it impossible for the AU to remain in Addis Ababa. There still will be an Addis Ababa. If there were to be a breakup of the country, it would be a smaller entity that would be surrounding Addis Ababa. But nevertheless, it would be possible for the AU to maintain its headquarters there. You would have a similar situation with the Economic Commission, UN Economic Commission for Africa, which also has its headquarters in Addis Ababa, although that would be a less serious situation because you don't draw representatives from every country in the continent to the ECA. So it would be a problem. Yes, it would not be impossible to operate from there. The hope is that it simply does not come to that.
Would either of you other two like to weigh in on that?
Well, I agree with what Ambassador Shin just said. I don't think it would come to that, but again, referencing the tensions within Ethiopia, it's broader than Tigray in terms of other groups having clashes and conflicts. So again, back to the need for a national dialogue about the direction they want to go. My personal view is that it would be very difficult to have an election in June unless a lot of discussion has taken place among different groups as to the direction they would like to go. And also a comprehensive peace plan. The AU has been referred to by Abe in terms of a willingness to have the AU look at certain crimes that may have been committed during this conflict, internal conflict, but I've not seen anything happen concretely to spell out how that might happen. But I think having the AU there and having access by African leaders around the continent to Ethiopia, I'm hoping that they can help reference different ideas that could be put into a national dialogue of some kind.
Thank you. Ambassador Huddleston, do you have any comments you'd like to add before we turn it over to the audience for questions?
Well, I would like to add that, and a bit controversial, that I think the African Union, maybe the West, the Europeans and the United States, in some ways lack vision about Africa. And we need to start thinking, in my way of thinking, more broadly about Africa. For example, the African Union says all countries have to remain with their colonial borders unless they have like a 30-year war in Sudan, and then you get South Sudan. Although Somaliland didn't have the same borders because it was British and the rest of Somalia was Italian, there's a refusal to recognize Somaliland, which has been trying to gain independence for over 20 years. And the fear, of course, is logical that this will start a breakup around Africa. Well, I hope that Ethiopia won't break up, and I think that's only one possibility. If they have improved leadership, it might not happen, or as Reese says, and David, if they have a national dialogue. But Ethiopia was under the United Nations federated with Eritrea at one point. And, you know, you can imagine these shifting borders since its creation in the 2nd century AD. Ethiopia has grown, it shrunk, it's grown, it shrunk. So it's possible it will change. It's possible that other countries in Africa will change too. As you see the conflict against terrorism and insurgency across the Sahel, the difficulties of governing Congo. So Ethiopia, in a way, seems to me a warning about what can happen if you don't address the issues of poor leadership, weak institutions, poverty, and terrorism in a very comprehensive way. And I think that no matter where the AU is, they need to begin to do a better job on this front.
Thank you, all three. And now I'd like to turn it over to President Flynn, who will moderate the questions from the audience.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Ambassador Ray. We have a lot of good questions from the audience, and I think the first one points some statistics, and the anonymous attendee expresses the view that the situation in Oromia is much worse. That goes to the question, and Ambassador Brazil, perhaps you could address this. Why is there attention being paid right now to Ethiopia, Tigre, when there are situations elsewhere in the country? And perhaps you could comment on those as well.
Well, I think David and Vicki have given some of the history. At the moment, the tipping point seemed to be the fact that Tigre went ahead with its regional elections, despite the fact that the election or the regional elections have been postponed because of COVID. And they proceeded, and in a sense, the TPLF preemptively attacked the national government's military forces in Tigray before the national military forces in Tigray preemptively attacked the TPLF. So you have that situation. I guess there are the fact that the national troops attacked in a region makes Tigray a little different than in Oromia and Benishangul Gumuz, where you don't seem to have a situation where the national government is sending in forces to dampen down local conflict or groups that are behind local conflict. And in Benishangul Gumuz, I also should point out there's a Sudanese element there too, because it borders Sudan. So that I think makes Tigray different, number one. Number two, the attacks on the civilian population in Tigray is different, so that the discussion among some groups looking at this issue is that all of Tigray's population was treated as if they were TPLF members, and therefore they had no safety and nowhere to go, no protection against attack. And that's not true. There are opposition parties in Tigray to the TPLF, and so that the civilian population was not protected. And that again makes it different, I think, from Oromia and Benishangul Gumuz, which and other parts of Ethiopia, where they're at least haven't had a concerted national attack by the national military against a region. Other views might pop in from David and Vicky.
David and Vicky, any comments on that?
Let me just add very quickly. I think that the major distinction between what is happening in Oromia today, and there are problems there. So the person asking the question is asking a very legitimate question. But in Tigray, the magnitude of several of the atrocities or massacres, I think by any definition, is more serious than what you have today in Oromia. In Oromia, it's more of a political problem. You have several very prominent Oromo political leaders in jail. You've had some ethnic conflict in Oromia. What you don't have in Oromia are Eritrean troops marauding the country, displacing local people, taking their own Eritrean refugee nationals back to Eritrea and randomly killing people. That just isn't happening in Oromia at the moment. So I do see a distinction, but I take the point that there are issues in other parts of the country, Oromia and Benishangul Gumuz, as Ray pointed out, and even some issues in Afar and Somali region that need to be watched very carefully.
Thank you. We have a comment and a question. Comment that there seem to be two different standards for poor and rich countries when it comes to waging war, and that the rush to judgment has preceded any proper investigations. Accusations of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and systematic rape are lobbed at the country. Sergey Huddleston, could you comment on what do you think should happen in terms of investigating this? What is the best means to do that, to try to determine where the truth is?
Well, there absolutely needs to be an international investigation, and the letter that the 5 ambassadors signed, and myself included, called for an investigation, and it looks like there's some willingness on the part of the Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, to have that investigation. I don't think there's any doubt at all about the massacres, the one at St. Mary's of Zion, in Adwa, where 800 Tigrayans, Ethiopians, of course, were killed by Eritrean troops. There's also several other massacres that have been documented. There's been a claim of ethnic cleansing. That's still just a claim, but from what we actually know as fact, there have been terrible massacres. There also is the presence of the Eritrean troops as well as the Amhara militias. So we know that this is a tragic conflict, a brutal conflict, and what has to happen, as the United States has called for, Senator Coons just was there for the removal of the Eritrean troops immediately. The Prime Minister says he'll remove them, but many people say, no, they'll just put on Ethiopian uniforms or they'll just be removed along the border. But I think the real tragedy here is that you have the military intervention of another country, Eritrea, and so far they haven't been sanctioned for their intervention and the human rights abuses they have carried out.
Thank you. Ambassador Brazil and the others, what role is there for the United States? What's our relationship with Ethiopia and Tigre at this point? And what are our options? Should we do this unilaterally, or should we be partnering with others in the region or even the Europeans? And I'll add to that question, what's the impact on the region? We keep talking about the humanitarian crisis that could spill over into all of the Horn of Africa and beyond, as well as perhaps even to Europe.
Well, the US and Ethiopia have had over 100 years of diplomatic relationships. And when I was there, I would point out that I thought after 100 years, there's no issue that we can't talk to each other about. There should be no issue. So as far as I'm concerned, the US should speak and dialogue with the Ethiopians on this issue. We have a large Ethiopian diaspora in the United States, so there's a connection there through the people-to-people kind of relationship, and the diaspora has many elements and a strong interest in what's happening in Ethiopia and a variety of views. So I do think, and the US has an interest in a peace. Ethiopia was seen as an anchor of stability in the Horn of Africa, and the fact that it might not quite have that same profile right now is of importance to the broader interests of the United States in the Horn of Africa, as well as other African states in the interest in the Horn of Africa. So I think the US has a role. I think there should be a role with other countries included, because this is an issue that I think will take many minds to work out an approach that's satisfactory to the Ethiopians. So the EU has been active. The African Union has, as I said, has been mentioned. The United Nations has a role to play as far as I'm concerned, because you do have foreign troops in Ethiopia, which internationalizes the issue. So that, yes, the US should play a role, but also in coordination with other countries. The UK has spoken out individually. I know Finland has. You've got the international non-governmental organization community speaking out. Even Doctors Without Borders was an eyewitness to the killing of civilian men in Tigre by Eritrean troops. So there are a lot of groups that can speak to the issue. And we should be working cooperatively with the Ethiopians themselves, with the Ethiopian government, to find a way forward.
Thank you. Ambassador Shin or Shoji Huddleston, anything to add?
Yeah, I'd like to just add a point on this issue of the atrocities or the massacres that have taken place in Tigray, which also relates to the question about what the US should or should not be doing. there actually have been several good interim reports by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, which is a government-affiliated commission, which has provided some surprisingly frank commentary on what has happened in both Aksum and in Maikadra, where there was a totally different event involving Tigrayans attacking Amhara in Maikadra. This was one of the very early attacks. The Amnesty International has done some good preliminary reporting, and Human Rights Watch has also done some good reporting. So there's a lot that we don't know yet. There's much more needs to be learned about what happened, and certainly there have to be, the U.S. can help by insisting that there is accountability for these attacks. There is, I think, more information out there than perhaps what the questioner suggested. One other role that I think the United States can play and is playing is to put pressure on the government of Eritrea to remove its troops from Ethiopia. This serves no useful purpose, at least certainly not in terms of Ethiopia. And I just can't imagine why even the government of Ethiopia would want to continue the practice of allowing Eritrean troops to operate with impunity inside its borders. And that's effectively what it's doing at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Further to that, we have a question on what is the ethnic composition of the Ethiopian military and how has that affected how Addis has pursued the Tigre issue. And I would add something to that. What has been the relationship between the US government and the Ethiopian military in terms of military cooperation, training, IMET programs, et cetera? And I would defer to who feels most comfortable answering that question.
Well, I could begin by saying the United States has had a long history of working with the Ethiopian military. We've provided non-lethal training to the Ethiopian military, particularly because the Ethiopian military has been so essential in providing peacekeeping in surrounding regions, to include Sudan and Somalia. In fact, the head of the peacekeeping in Somalia was an Ethiopian, but he was recently fired by the Ethiopian government. The Ethiopian military is a professional and effective military. They have been in the past accused of human rights abuses, and that, of course, is always a huge concern, especially when the United States considers providing training. So the issue for the United States, I think, is a bigger issue than just the military. It's the issue of Ethiopia being the country that provides the stability for the Horn of Africa. And with Ethiopia under this enormous pressure of a civil war in Tigre, of tensions from the other ethnic groups, it no longer can play this role in the Horn of Africa. And I'd be very interested to what my colleagues have to say about that. Who's going to replace Ethiopia in this role? Are any of these African countries up to it? Can Kenya take this on?
Can any of you comment on the ethnic composition of the military? We do have one comment that the Tigre officers were all removed.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I can't vouch for the fact that they all have been removed. I know most or many have been removed. Possibly all of them have been removed. But there's been an enormous change in the security structure of Ethiopia over the last 2 years. Both the military and the security services, where previously the TPLF was by far the predominant power in those organizations. That's all changed. The Tigrayans have been either largely or totally removed from those positions, and others have taken control. But I don't know the ethnic composition now, and I'm not sure that anyone outside of the government knows. If I could add one historical point on the U.S. military connection with Ethiopia. Interestingly, it was closest during the imperial government of Haile Selassie. The United States had a major military program with the Haile Selassie government. In fact, we were the primary providers of training and military equipment to that government. That all came to a crashing halt when Haile Selassie was overthrown in 1974, and the Mengistu Haile Mariam government came into power and was a very left-wing regime. And it never really resumed again. What we had after the Mengistu government was overthrown in 1991 was a modest IMET program. We had training, not a large training program, but some. We had very modest military assistance, sales and grants for Ethiopia, but it was never what I would call a significant or intensive military relationship with Ethiopia following the overthrow of the Haile Selassie government.
Thank you, Ambassador Shin. Ambassador Brazil, did you have something to add to that?
No, I was agreeing with Ambassador Shin's interpretation. There wasn't a large program, a military program in Ethiopia necessarily after the EPRDF came into play.
Thank you. A question, does the Tigre affair distract Ethiopia from negotiations with Egypt and Sudan over the Renaissance Dam project and its inherent issue of water insecurity risks to Egypt and Sudan? Might there be an armed conflict over the dam? And I would also add to that, could you please explain what the Renaissance Dam project is for those of our viewers who aren't familiar with it? And I don't know who wants to answer that question. Who's most familiar with it?
I'm going to call on David because I know he's been following this.
I'd be happy to deal with it. I've spent a lot of my day on Al Jazeera and Al Hurra talking about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, known as the GERD, when it is completed, and it's about 80% done at the moment, will be the largest hydropower dam in all of Africa in terms of the amount of electricity that it produces. It is 18 miles from the Sudan border on the Blue Nile, so it will have a major impact upon water flow going down the Blue Nile, which provides more than half of all of the water for the main Nile River. And therefore, Egypt and Sudan, the two downstream countries, are very interested in what happens to the GERD. It is not an irrigation project, so it will not siphon off water in perpetuity. It will simply block water during the period you fill the reservoir behind the dam, and it will have some impact on water flow after the dam is completed, and depending upon the release rate from the dam. And those are the two issues that Egypt and Sudan are concerned about. One is how fast do you fill the reservoir behind the dam? And if you fill it too quickly, it could cause damage to the downstream countries. And then once you get it filled, if you have 5, 6, 7 years of drought in a row, will Ethiopia release water out of the dam to make up for the loss because of drought? And that's the real sticking point. Ethiopia is reluctant to come up with some sort of formal agreement as to how much water they would release. So in the meantime, you have Egypt and Sudan who have joined hands and trying to insist that there be an official agreement with Ethiopia before there's any more filling of the reservoir. And the Sudanese were, until about 6 months ago, in alignment with Ethiopia on this position. But now that the border dispute has broken out between Sudan and Ethiopia, Sudan finds it convenient to align with Egypt and use this as pressure against Ethiopia on the border problem. So we've got a real complicated situation which is working against Ethiopia and has simply added to the problems that Ethiopia is facing in the region today. All of these things are linked together now.
Thank you, Ambassador Shin. We have a question about Abiy Ahmed, who seems to have lost a lot of his prestige and reputation in the world since his Nobel Prize. That's the comment of our audience member. What is his standing inside Ethiopia right now, and in the region more widely? And perhaps for those of us who aren't all that familiar with Ethiopia, if we could provide a little background on how he came to power and why he got the Nobel Prize. Ambassador Brazil or Chargé Huddleston?
Ray, do you want to go first and then I'll follow
You can go first.
Okay. Abdi came to power, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, as an EPRDF, the ruling party, whose foundation is TPLF, the Tigrayan region. So to me, it's very ironic that the Prime Minister who's carrying out the war against Tigre was part of the ruling party. What the Prime Minister excuse me, has desired to do through his new party, the Prosperity Party, is unite Ethiopia under a more centralized rule. And of course, the Tigrayan party, the TPLF part of the old ruling party, has said no, because they were the ones that came up with the idea of this ethnic federalism. So this is why Rhea and I keep talking about national dialogue. What kind of country or governance is Ethiopia going to have? Is it going to be ethnic federalism? Is it going to be a unitary state ruled from the center? Is it going to be regional federalism? I think it's absolutely essential for Ethiopia, its people in particular, to figure out what kind of governance they need. As for Abdi, I think that he has lost a lot of credibility. The way forward, I think, for the Prime Minister was to seek a dialogue, moderation, and not a war, a brutal war in Tigray. And so I think, given that he engaged in this war, it has hurt his prestige, at least around the world. And it seems to me, even looking at the questions from the audience, that it has enhanced the divisions within Ethiopia.
And I would definitely agree with that. Sometimes to solve an issue in terms of the conflict now going on in Tigray, you have to put it in the context of a larger issue. And that's why I keep talking about a national dialogue, because historically there's been this debate between a strong centralized run Ethiopia, usually I think in my view seen in large part as supported by Amharas and others, versus the decentralized view of running Ethiopia, which is enshrined in the constitution, but based on the ethnic divisions in the country. So that kind of dialogue, that kind of discussion is needed now, because I'm not sure how you can address some of the issues that seem to have cropped up in the Tigray situation without addressing sort of the issues nationally. So I'm hoping that's what happens. I would personally not like to see Ethiopia broken up. I don't think I know there's some members in the diaspora who think that foreigners do want to see Ethiopia broken up, but that's not the case, at least in my view, that the direction that I think should happen.
Ambassador Brazil, just to dig a little deeper on that, for a national dialogue, who would have the credibility to make that happen? Would they have to look to an external partner to do that?
Well, I think that it could happen with consensus of political leadership in the region. In my experience, Ethiopians are somewhat resistant to outsiders imposing on them an approach that they may or may not agree with. So I would like to see some consensus develop in the country, and I think a dialogue is possible with political leaders who, some of whom may be in jail right now, but political leaders who could speak up and sort of identify those issues that have to be discussed even before proceeding with a national election. Thank
you. Any other comments on that? We do have a question about the IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, perhaps playing a role. Is there any thought on that?
I'm not sure I understood that last question. What was it again?
Again, digging a little deeper on solutions to this, the national dialogue, and especially taking into account what Ambassador Brazil said about the resistance of Ethiopians to outside intervention. How can they be brought to some sort of a national dialogue?
Well, I think Rhea hit the nail on the head when she said, one, they're resistant to outside intervention or involvement. In fact, that may understate the point. I think they're highly resistant to it, and it does require, as Rhea suggested, an internal consensus that this is the way to move forward. The unfortunate part of Ethiopian culture is that compromise does not come easily to Ethiopians. And this requires an enormous amount of compromise, I'm afraid, and it's going to be very hard to do. But I would agree with both Vicky and Ray that a national dialogue eventually is the only way out of this current construct. And that doesn't seem to be in the cards anytime soon. Certainly the current leadership is not inclined to go in that direction. And it may get to the point where you have to have a longer, more hurtful stalemate before it actually reaches that point. But I don't see a solution until that point, and I don't see outside powers or personalities being able to change that.
Well, when I was in Ethiopia in 2006, we set up with the Ethiopians a national dialogue. And we used the Carter Center as to facilitate. And I think probably outside facilitation is needed. But as David said, it has to come from within and read too. So it did not in the end succeed, but it was all political parties plus civil society who were involved. And I think that's exactly the kind of thing that's needed now. I would like to just jump in and say that we've talked about a national dialogue, but that should not, that cannot come before you have a comprehensive peace plan in terms of what's going on right now. And I think that's important. You know, ceasefire, protection of the civilian population is needed, and I would hope to see peacekeepers come in to facilitate a separation of the Eritreans and move them out of Ethiopia.
Thank you. We have another question. How might the situation in Ethiopia impact the country's IMF program and funding from the World Bank? Could the country face sanctions? Who would like to answer that?
Well, I don't know if that kind of issue is something that, what is happening in Ethiopia right now is a humanitarian crisis because people are in jeopardy. They need food, medicine, and shelter on an emergency basis, and they need, and you've got the world and NGOs and other governments and other countries willing to help on the humanitarian aspect of it. You have people, I think, cheering from the sidelines, trying to encourage people to have a ceasefire and to protect the civilian population. But I'm not sure how you can do that until the Eritreans get out of Ethiopia. Now, the Prime Minister has said that Eritreans will be leaving Ethiopia. As I said, there are numerous rumors, unconfirmed, certainly, and no way to confirm them, that ultimately the plan is to absorb the Eritrean troops into the Ethiopian military somehow. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not, but there's enough misinformation flowing around that I think putting forth a plan from the Ethiopian government that people could look to and see that steps are being taken to get the Eritreans out of Ethiopia would be very important. And I hope that kind of free sharing of the plan, of any plan, would be forthcoming, and that way you can have accountability, because otherwise it becomes still opaque and open to misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add that I have not heard any discussion coming from either the World Bank or the IMF about imposing any kind of sanction at this juncture. I suppose one can't rule that out depending upon how circumstances develop. I would point out, however, that the European Union has withheld budgetary support already. The Trump administration was withholding some foreign aid, American foreign aid, from Ethiopia because of the deadlock on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The Biden administration de-linked that holding back of funds due to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, but is still holding back the funding for reasons that are not entirely clear. Maybe because of what is going on in Tigre, but it has not resumed that particular funding yet.
And I would just add, we really need to see full access of humanitarian aid to Tigre. And initially, there was very little aid getting in, and people were facing lack of medical assistance as well as starvation. The United Nations warned about a famine in Tigre. More assistance has gotten in, but I would, in my view, if Ethiopia does not allow full access, then the United States, like the European Union, should withhold developmental aid. Of course, not humanitarian aid, because that's so badly needed in Tigre. But in addition, I think the IMF and the World Bank, to the extent that they're active in Eritrea, should indeed withhold assistance from Eritrea until it is clear that Eritrea has removed its troops from Tigray.
Thank you. We have less than a couple of minutes left, and we still have more than 30 unanswered questions in our Q&A box. But before we go, I would just like to turn to each of you for some final parting comments. Let's start with Chargé Huddleston.
Oh, you didn't give me any time to think.
Oh, well, you can start anywhere.
You know, I love Ethiopia. It's my favorite country in Africa. And I shouldn't say that because I was ambassador in Mali and Madagascar, but there's just something about this really amazing history and tradition and the pride of the Ethiopian people. And so it is my sincere wish that Ethiopia, its people, begin to work together as a united country and to somehow begin to repair these terrible ethnic divisions that are, in my view, beginning to rip the country apart, because this is an amazing country, a very old country, the only country that really wasn't colonized. So I just want to see the best for Ethiopia.
Thank you.
I would just jump in on not parting thoughts per se, but when I was in Ethiopia, as far as I know, the Eritreans were never told that there was peace between the border situation had devolved into a peaceful situation. They've never been told that they were not fighting and in conflict with Ethiopia. I don't know if that's still the case now, but it certainly can affect the mentality of the Eritrean troops that have been sent to Ethiopia in terms of how they look at Ethiopians. And there's been looting, including of religious artifacts and other things that have been sent or taken by presumably the Eritreans. So I would hope that somehow the very human feeling of retribution on the part of any group involved in this issue could be dampened down somehow to the point that people are open to dialogue going forward and not continued fighting and raping and looting and killing.
Thank you.
I guess like Vicky, I have an enormous affinity for Ethiopia. I've been affiliated with it in one way or another for a long period of time. And I'm saddened by what is happening today. This is not the first occasion that Ethiopia has gone through difficult times. They've had quite frankly, a long history of difficulties, but they've always survived. They've always managed to somehow come out of their situation and manage to get through very difficult times. I certainly hope that is the case again. In talking with some of my Tigrayan friends in the last 6 months or so, I'm frankly troubled by some of those who are talking about secession or independence. I think that would be a terrible mistake. I can appreciate the pain they're going through in Tigre today. The terrible things have happened there that have to be stopped. But the solution, in my view, is not the balkanization of Ethiopia as we know it today. It's coming together as an Ethiopian people and resolving these issues in some kind of dialogue. And the sooner that can happen, the better.
Thank you. Ambassador Ray, would you like to make some closing comments?
I just want to thank the three panelists for exceptional presentations. Added a lot to my knowledge. My knowledge of Ethiopia is quite limited, having only served in West Africa and Southern Africa. And of course, some of the issues that they raise cause concern for the continent as a whole. And that is, if one of the continent's oldest countries or societies can't keep itself together, it paints a very bleak picture for the rest of the continent as we go forward. And thanks to all of those who tuned in, and of course to you, President Flynn, for your unwavering support for this program. And I look forward to the next one. Again, thank you all for coming today.
Thank you, Ambassador Ray, and thank you especially to our panelists for a really interesting discussion. Our Africa program is new, and so please stay tuned. We will have more events, and we have articles on our website as well. Please check us out, www.fpri.org. And check out our FPRI YouTube channel as well, where you can view videos from our Africa program events, as well as programs that touch on all corners of the globe. Thank you again to our supporters and members, and please stay safe.
President Flynn, could I say one more thing before we go? On the video of the event, I would encourage those of you, I encourage everyone to look at it, but I also encourage you to share it with your contacts outside of FPRI, just as a matter of information. The first Ethiopia Tigre event that we did in November, the video had over 20,000 views. So this is a topic that there is a large appetite for. Please share it widely.
Thank you. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you again to all, and take care.
Thank you.